Welcome back to Lifting the Veil, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cullen Smith, and we're going to start off this video with a little bit of humor. We're going to drop in really, really deep into some extraordinary original discoveries that I've put together for this recent video, and it wasn't supposed to turn out like this, but it ended up, I followed the thread, and it ended up being very, very profound. So we're going to see some really incredible things throughout this video. So I hope you guys stick with me and enjoy.
That it's a demonic, religious, Hinduistic, occultic practice. It's about becoming God.
I came across this guy online, and he's on, I think it was on Instagram, and based upon the things that he says all over Instagram, and he's got a huge following, I don't know why, but
God. They believe it's about escaping reincarnation and becoming God. This is the whole point. Channeling different gods and deities. Of course, the people today doing it, they're doing it just so they could look better and be more fit, but you can't escape what you're actually doing. You're doing a religious practice. It's a done deal, but people love this yoga shit and this meditation and, I meditate and I do yoga and I'm positive. It's such a trend today. Why would 40 plus million Americans be doing a Hinduistic practice? You have to ask yourself this.
he goes by the name of Tit, T-I-T, and what I found hilarious is that he looks and sounds, and I mean the nose, the lips, his entire, he literally looks exactly like Dr. Joe Dispenza. Only the funny thing is about it is they are literally these polar opposite embodiments of basically the same morphology, the same physical mannerisms and everything. I mean, the way they speak to the way they look, it's identical, pretty much. It's like a bizarro world kind of counter, dark twin type thing.
They believe it's about escaping reincarnation.
And the funny thing is this guy says the exact, has the exact opposite. It's like the incompetent twin incarnation of Dr. Joe Dispenza, who is, just like doing this profound work, like just doing it, and has done it within himself, and is doing it and proving it with his, with his workshops.
Why are you doing this to me?
To show you just how much you don't know. Open your eyes. Who are you in this vast multiverse?
There are no gods. There are no deities. There's only the universal one, which you cannot even begin to fathom, whose very nature of which you are composed, and which composes you, that you exist within, and it within you. There is only one God. There is only all that is. It's the ineffable, of which you are an integral part of. You're merely a protein antenna standing atop a cellular membrane of a cell within the body of which we call God. If you watch any of the full presentations on my channel, you will begin to understand this. You will know this as a truth, a universal truth, that you will begin to know and understand exactly what God is. You will no longer believe, but you will know. You will have direct experience with it. The divine union, the yoga, the you, the tying and the binding, the connections. The web of electric dendritic energy that ties, that binds all of existence, that binds all of life, which flows from this universal electric river of life and universal intelligence that connects us all.
And if in our research, 90% of the people during that meditation, their hearts go into coherence at the exact same time, in the exact same day, in the exact same meditation, it must mean we're bound by an invisible field of energy. It connects us, and love is the glue that does it. Love has no limits. And if this intelligence is giving you life, it's a loving intelligence, intelligent love, and when you make contact with it, your consciousness merges with its consciousness, you should begin to feel something. And that feeling is called wholeness, oneness. It will be reflected in your brain scan. Your brain will become more coherent. Soon after, your brain will begin to fire more in unison. We've seen it enough times. At the exact same time, time, your heart will burst open, and you will be humbled by a greater love. And your heart will go into coherence, which will then feed your brain, which will then feed your heart. All of a sudden, you're producing a huge electromagnetic field. And the energy around your body that will measure will begin to become more light, which means you're releasing more information. You're connected to something greater. The energy centers of your body will be more balanced because your autonomic nervous system is your nervous system of balance and order.
This next short segment is from my upcoming full film, Navigating the Maze, Symbols of Power, Part 4. The Hieros Gamos, within the human nature, within the human consciousness of the brain, of the soul, of the psyche. So as we've covered before in numerous times throughout these series and these presentations, is that the Hieros Gamos is Latin for the sacred marriage, or the sacred union, the sacred yoga, the yoking, the union between the two polarities, the two principles of nature. So this is why the Hieros Gamos is the solar eclipse, as the unification of opposite. Literally produces is where we get the very origin of our diamond wedding rings. It's the sacred marriage. It is the ring of light, of the halo, of the corona, of the sun and the moon. The halos, the hallowed holy halo. And so this is why the unification of these two opposites, these two opposite spheres, is what I just showed you in the pro-nuclear fusion, which is the unification, the Hieros Gamos of each gamete, which is the game of love, the game of marriage, because game etymologically comes from joy, enlivenment, communion, meaning merriment, the sport, joy, mirth, pastime, game, amusement, pleasure, joy, amusement, fun, from the Proto-Indo-European root of men, to think or to have in mind. So this is why it's called the game of love. It's the sacred game, the Hieros Gamos, the communion of the gamete. The gamete is each set of chromosomes that is contributed during the sacred communion, what's known as sperma communion, or the communion of the sperm, which, as I've already covered at the very end of Symbols of Power Part 2 and Part 3 as well. So we're not going to go into that again. But that is basically the crux of all of my work, that it basically revolves around, is the Hieros Gamos and the sperma communion. So this is why it's called holy matrimony. The root word of moni, of mon, of the moon, which is why we have our honeymoon, which is the joy. It's the period of excitement, the merriment. And this is the origin of where we get our modern wedding ceremonies, which comes from pagan hand fasting. It's the sacred marriage, the sacred yoga, the union, the yoking of the two, being bound together as one, like when they are becoming unified, working in unison, joining together as one. And it doesn't mean just two, it can mean, an infinite number, joined together, to bind, bound by the hand. These couple short segments are actually from my full Symbols of Power film series, so that's why they're somewhat out of context, as well as not really fitting with the full context of this presentation. But I wanted to include it because I've already done this work in showing what the true meanings of the yoga and the union and the true enlightenment of consciousness and the unification and becoming one with God and the universal consciousness, what it actually means.
And when your consciousness climbs that stairway, that ladder to heaven, and you sit and you take your rightful place upon the throne of God, you sit in the captain's seat, and you become aware of God, and God becomes aware of you, and you awaken to God, and God awakens within you.
Father! Father, the sleeper has awakened!
As you sit, be still and know that I am. And this is the true secret behind the flux capacitor, which is the flux cap. The lux cap meaning the light head, the capstone, the pinnacle, the capstone that holds the light, the enlightenment. The flux capacitor. Capacitance is the ability to hold charge or to hold store electrical energy. And this is the same reason why they show the great central star as the pineal gland of enlightenment, as well as the fire in the middle. The center of the pyramid is the fire in the middle, the pyramid, the middle fire, literally what it translates to, the sacred flame. Go back and see Symbols of Power Part 2 and Part 3 for the full context of how this process happens. But now we're just focusing on the pinnacle, the apex of it. But so that's why they show the great central sun, Xibalba, of the ancient Mayan and Aztec underworld, the star of death and rebirth, of death and resurrection, which is why they're showing the enlightenment of the Christ one, the reincarnation and the eternal cycle of life and death. And of course, the film is all about the essence of reincarnation, or essentially parallel lives and an eternal cycle. So I have to go ahead and hash this out and explain it real quick. I didn't want to, because I didn't want to make this into a 3-hour-long film presentation or anything like that, so I'm trying to get through it as quick as I can and just skim over some of this stuff. But we'll be covering all of this in full separate presentations coming in the future in different installments of the Symbols of Power series. So I didn't want to cover it too much, but since it came up, I feel like I have to explain it now. The shape of the inner portions of the brain, the midbrain, limbic brain, as well as the cerebellum, all combine essentially to form a pyramidal structure, or a triangular, perfect, almost an equidistant, equilateral triangular structure within the central axes of the brain. And there's a lot more sacred geometry to the esoteric anatomy that we'll be going through in future presentations, but I wanted to point this out. As I just showed you, is literally the exact symbolism, or basically a fractal representation, in other words, a microcosmic representation of the human body sitting in full lotus position, or in other words, in pyramidal structure. And just to clarify, this graphic, this concept of the pyramid overlaid with the brain, is originally the research of Gary Osborne. However, it should be made very crystal clear that the concept of the head being symbolically represented as encapsulated by the pyramid, by the triangle, goes way back to ancient times of the Pythagoreans, to the elder cathedral art, the stained glass artwork. It's a very ancient concept. It is embedded in the subliminal, symbolic concept of the very linguistics and the etymology, as I will be covering much deeper in future presentations, as the very etymology of the cap itself, the capstone, which literally means the head, the capitus, the capital, the head. It means the uppermost, the top, the pinnacle, the apex. It's embedded into the language itself. I mean, literally, for someone to think that they originally came up with this is utterly ridiculous. Although this image and the concept of the pyramid overlaid with the brain is the research of Gary Osborne, so I need to clarify that, and I owe him that much. However, yet again, I mean, I've completely shown the etymology and the linguistics here, which is entirely independent of that. From the very etymology of the ophthalmos, as we will be covering in this video, and the very etymology of the ophis, which means the serpent, also means the reference to wisdom, literally means with the sharpness of vision. So we're talking about the innermost chamber. And again, as I've covered, the etymology of the fornix is literally the furnace. The innermost it literally means a vaulted archway, hence why I was talking about the fornix, referring to a vaulted archway, hence why it literally links mentally to the vaulted archway, or the king's queen's chamber, the vaulted archway inside the pyramid. It's not hard to come to. It's not like you have to rip off somebody else's work in order to come to these conclusions entirely independently, just by studying the linguistics and the symbolism alone. It is there. The Hebrew Kabbalistic tree of life, and it represents the three sephiro, or the three spheres of Keter, Bina, and Chokmah, which are essentially the Holy Trinity of the absolute crown, the absolute capstone, or the pinnacle of the Adam Kadmon on the Kabbalistic tree of life, which represents the spheres of the heavens, the Holy Trinity, the Most High. which emanates forth from the ineffable of the Ein Sof. And of course, you have that structure of the equilateral triangle, which connects from the sephiro, or the sphere of Tiphareth, which corresponds to the heart in Adam Kadmon of the human body, corresponding directly with the pineal gland at the center of the brain, at the heart of the brain. So you have the heart of the body, of the torso, which corresponds with the sacred heart, the sacred flame, which corresponds directly with the pineal gland, which is the very heart, the sacred flame within the brain. So when you receive that anointing, that sacred anointing from the pineal gland and the pituitary gland, you become as king, and you take your place, your rightful place on the throne of God, as you always have been and as you always will be, as the eternal, ineffable I am presence of consciousness itself, which we all share that same source of and presence of consciousness. And so that is when you are Christed, or you are anointed. I'm not going to cover this because we'll be going much more thoroughly in depth in future presentations. So I'm just going to mention that. We're not going to cover that here. And you receive your coronation. You take the crown, you take the throne as you reach the Most High. And so you receive the holy halo of the halos of the sun, and your own coronation of your corona, of your halo, which we will cover much more in depth. So we'll leave it at that. And of course, the tree of life is obviously as well as corresponded to the spheres and cubes of creation. Again, the cubic wave fields, the cubic waveforms, which formulate a 64 tetrahedron grid, which composes the vector equilibrium, or in sacred geometry also known as the cube octahedron, which is a 12-sided form, which is also exactly the truth of what the human brain actually comes from. The human brain is literally a direct solid form of the vector equilibrium, which is a 12-spoked axis wheel. And so of course the human brain has 6 axes, which we can view from the inferior view of the brain from underneath, as well as from the anterior portion of the brain, which is from in front, or the posterior, or in back. So it's seen from both axes. So in other words, each 6 axes of the brain combined form a 12-axis spoked wheel, which is corresponded to the 12-spoked wheel of the zodiacal year, which corresponds macrocosmically to the macrocosmos, astrologically, astronomically, which corresponds astrophysiologically to the human body. So the cube octahedron, or the vector equilibrium, is literally the underlying structure. It is the masculine structure, the father pattern, the pater, the pattern which formulates the very structure of the toroidal dynamic of all of nature, the feminine form of mater, the masculine and the feminine form uniting to create all of energy and all of physics and all motion as we can perceive it throughout physical 3-dimensional space, which is why this 12-spoked axis is the very structure of the vacuum of space itself. And it is in this direct way that you are directly modeled in the image of God, that you are a direct microcosmic reflection of the entire whole. You are a holographic fractal portion of the whole. A hologram literally means each portion of the whole contains all of the same information as the whole itself. So in other words, it is holos, it is whole, it is holy, it is holistic. So it is in this way that the ancients and the ancient philosophers used to always say that man is the measure of the universe, as Protagoras of Abdera had said, that man is the measure. Essentially, it is the human body is a measuring stick that we can use to reverse engineer the entire structure of the physics of space itself. Again, God is literally just a large version of the human body, or just a larger superorganism in and of itself, which we compose cellular structures inside of that macrocosmic body in tetrahedral structure of the central axes of the brain, which run in a 6-axis pattern across the brain. So there are seemingly literally infinite ways from the previous film series in which I've demonstrated duality, or the polarity, the union of opposites, the divine yoga, the sacred union, the sacred marriage,
between the masculine and the feminine polarities, or the two dual opposites of the human anatomy, let alone just the human brain and the skull itself. But again, here we are looking, again, it's the 6 axes of the human brain, which are the 6 axes of spatial navigation, of which the central hub, the central point, the 0 point, is the very, what's known as the optic chiasma, or the crux, essentially. It's the cross. When we're looking at the cranial floor, we notice the dual hyperboloid structure of the electromagnetic field of the torus dynamic. We notice the perfect balance between the masculine and the feminine, or in other words, frontal lobe and the posterior lobes of the cerebellum are perfectly balanced. This is the 6 axes of the cube of space, which emanate radially from this central axis, the central point. And again, I was mentioning how you sit upon the throne of God, and I know you guys probably think this is just chasing pareidolia, or that it's just a case of my own apophenia, or in other words, me looking for patterns where they don't actually exist. But I can prove all of these things from infinite ways, and we will be going much deeper in future presentations. I just wanted to sort of just skim over I just wanted to show it visually, but when I show it visually, I can't help but give the full download and explanation of it all. So again, we are noticing how you sit upon the throne of God at the most high, the pinnacle, at the top of the mountain, or within the cave, entering into the fornix, into the 3rd ventricle of the brain, which sits directly in the center of the brain. And so again, you're sitting lotus, full lotus, within your own self, within your own brain. Your true self sits within, at the very center, and it's at the very center of that pyramid is the pineal gland. Literally sits at the exact midpoint, the fire in the middle, the ignition point at the very center of that pyramidal structure within the brain.
Open your eyes.
Time Stone, and we see Strange use it throughout Multiverse of Madness. When Doctor Strange uses the Eye of Agamotto in the comics, a 3rd eye usually appears on his forehead, just like the 3rd eye seen in Multiverse of Madness. You can make the argument that Sinister Strange's 3rd eye was more about Darkhold corruption, but when it comes to the main MCU Stephen Strange, this is a sign he's powering up.
Where it sits directly between the diencephalon in the cave, or underneath the fornix in the 3rd ventricle, which is that hollow opening at the top of the mountain, at the top of the apex of the holy pillar of the pyramid. And so again, you are literally sitting on the throne of God, which I will be going much deeper into this in future presentations, but literally sits upon this bone here, which is atop the sphenoid bone, called the sella turcica, which literally means is Latin for the Turkish saddle, or the Turkish seat. It is literally the mercy seat of the Most High, of the Holy of Holies within the Temple of Solomon. It is literally the seat of God. It is the throne. It is the chariot of God, and we will be exploring that in so much more depth in future presentations. I don't want to give it all away yet.
Other bones become more visible only when looking inside the skull. The sphenoid bone makes up the anterior base of the cranium. It is a butterfly-shaped bone with a central body and 2 pair of laterally projecting wings. These wings form portions of the orbit. The body of the sphenoid features a depression known as the sella turcica, which houses the pituitary gland. Located between the orbits, the ethmoid bone makes up a portion of the cranial floor and also the roof of the nasal cavity. An inferior projection, the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone, forms part of the nasal septum. The crista galli projects superiorly from the ethmoid bone and serves as the attachment point for the falx cerebri, a dural fold. Extending laterally from the crista galli is the cribriform plate, a perforated area through which the olfactory nerves pass. The 2 L-shaped palatine bones form the posterior third of the hard palate, part of the nasal cavity, and a portion of the orbit. The small, thin lacrimal bones make up the anterior portion of the medial wall of each orbit. A groove known as the lacrimal groove helps to form the nasolacrimal canal, which contains a duct that allows tears to travel to the nasal cavity. The vomer is an elongated, plow-shaped bone that forms the inferior and posterior part of the nasal septum. The internal and external skull bones articulate precisely, forming an intricate structure perfectly suited to its functions.
So now we're going to have to come full circle back to the Symbols of Power Part 2, Part 1, and the Part 3 films, where all of which I covered the previous esoteric anatomy regarding the conquering or the taming or the subduing of the serpent, and the serpent energy and the kundalini energy and the human physiology of overcoming the lower basal nature, which is serpentine at its essence, and how the human physiology itself is serpentine, is capitulate of a serpentine nature from the serpentine spinal column of all vertebrates to the central nervous system, including how I've discovered that sphenoid bone in the spinal column itself is reminiscent of the dragon within, as well as the inner dragon of the cerebrospinal fluid system, of how the central cerebrospinal canal resembles what I like to think of as a water dragon, in other words, a water serpent, a sea serpent, which leads us to the hero's journey of all mythology, revolves entirely around taming or how to train your dragon. So in some mythologies and legend, it refers to slaying or conquering the dragon, when the truth is the dragon represents our most powerful primal essence, our most powerful subconscious nature, which needs to be harnessed and utilized, as depicted in Game of Thrones, the mother of dragons, the dragon mother. And again, as I fully covered back in Symbols of Power Part 3, as well as Part 2, I covered the whole mythology of the serpent dragon monster of the deep abyss, of the chaos monster, the female dragon mother, the mother of dragons, which goes back to ancient myth of Marduk slaying Tiamat. And Tiamat was the chaos serpent monster of the deep abyss, which is exactly what they're depicting in Aquaman, just a rehash and retelling of Neptune, Marduk, conquering Tiamat, of the mother of the abysmal chaos, and he slays her, and he's wielding the weapon of the Vajra, or the lightning bolt of the gods, in other words, the Sai. It's a three-pronged weapon, which then became the Hindu Trishula of Shiva, who is also tames or conquers the serpent, the lower nature, and who also wields the trident, which I call it the Sident, because the Sident comes from the ancient Greek letter psi, which literally means a form of psychic energy, which is why Aquaman wields the trident of King Atlan, and when he becomes the king and he takes the throne, his rightful place upon the throne, which is located where? Directly between the eyes of the great serpent monster of the abyss, between the eyes of the great dragon, which is literally where the Sella Turcica is in the human skull, on the sphenoid bone. It's symbolically depicting the actual chariot or the throne of God, the dragon throne. The
And so this is why, again, Marduk slayed Tiamat with the Sident, and this is why Aquaman carries the Sident, and he conquers Tiamat, the Chaos Dragon monster of the Abyss. Then he gains his psychic power, and he commands the power of the Seven Seas after uniting the Seven, which is representative symbolically of the esoteric nature of ascending the throne of the Kundalini rising, of the harnessing of the ascended mastery, of the 7 chakras, of the seven energy centers, uniting the 7. And 7 is related to Hindu Shiva. Shiva is the Lord of 7. In Hebrew, it's known as Shivan, or sitting Shiva. And so again, Shiva is the Lord is the Lord of chaos. He is the controller of the chaotic nature, and this is symbolized by wrapping the serpent around his neck. And this is exactly why in Game of Thrones, the king, the true king, ascends to the true heir to the throne, ascends to the throne by slaying the Chaos Dragon Queen, the chaos monster of evil of the chaos of the abyss. And then what does he slay her with? He slays her with the Sident, with the Sai, the 3-pronged weapon, and nobody has any clue of the symbolism that was here. It's all here. The dragon throne, the true heir, the true king, the true heir to the throne, slaying the dragon monster of the abysmal chaos. It's all here. I've decoded the whole thing. It's perfect. And this is exactly why the trident or the Sident is symbolic of the human brain, as well as it's in Hinduism, it's known as the Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, the Holy Trinity united of the central nervous system. And I've discovered how Aquaman's trident is literally exactly the same representation of the human brain, central nervous system, and the spinal column, complete with the little sacrum at the very base of the trident or the Sident. And this is why they symbolically depict him holding the Sident directly over his face, where the Sai is presented in the brain. And as he emits his psychic power over and commands over the 7 waters, the 7 seas. He recruits the great serpent dragon monster of the abyss to do his bidding, because he conquers the lower nature and utilizes his psychic potential, riding on the dragon throne. And this is where we get the myth or the story of this is the true secret and the meaning of the chariot of the gods. It's not referring to aliens or UFOs, it's referring to the inner potential of the enlightened physiology. It's referring to the Most High, the chariot or the throne of God within us, within our consciousness, our own physiology, our own psychic potential. The king, or the sun king, the solar king, the hero of Heru, rides the eagle or the winged serpent. The serpent represents the lower nature, whereas it sprouts wings, becomes the feathered serpent, and it takes flight as the higher nature. And by taming our lower nature, that's how we train our dragon and utilize and harness our core primal basal potential and reach and soar into the heights of heaven, or the heights of higher consciousness, higher awareness, represented by the phoenix, the eagle, the falcon, as Horus or Heru is the hero, comes from Hor or Har or Haru or Horu or Heru, meaning the high flying one.
To be afraid to fly!
But so this is the exact center point of where the 6-axis comes to a crux, comes to a head, is directly at that central axis, directly upon the seat, the Sella Turcica, the throne of God, which is where the pituitary gland sits. The pituitary gland literally rests upon the Turkish saddle, upon the Sella Turcica. So again, that is the exact crux, the exact ignition point between the balance of the two polarities, between the hyperboloid spirals of the torus dynamic, of the electromagnetic field, at the direct center of the cube of space, which essentially it's a spherical structure, it's a toroidal spheroid, but it's also formulated upon the sacred geometry of the Metatron's cube. So it's essentially the essence of squaring the circle, or in other words, cubic wave fields of creation, spheres and cubes of creation, the two sacred geometrical forms that create every structure in physical form. And I also want to point out here while we're on this, that this is exactly the same homologous nature of the peace symbol of the lobes of the human brain, the two lobes of the cerebrum, the temporal lobes on the side, angling down at the perfect exact structure as the peace symbol, directly bilaterally symmetrically dissected by the middle axis. The 6-axis, the cube of space, is how we navigate spatially. And the reason for this is that every creation story initiates from a singular point of emanation, from cosmic void to the singular cavitation which produces emanations of energy, of light. Is the masculine ray of light, of Ra, emanating forth from the cosmic void of Nuit. And the 6 axes are the up, down, left, right, and orthogonal. And so the cube consists of the 7. It consists of the 6 radial axes, and then it consists of the 7th central hub.
And in the Pythagorean teachings of ancient Greece, this was known as the Pythagorean cube 7. From this comes the great occult axiom: the center is the father of the directions, the dimensions, and the distances. This cube again represents 6 points with the man in the middle. The ancient Greeks also taught that souls come to the Earth and return to the Milky Way via 7 planetary spheres, those being Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, known as the wandering stars. And the image of the 7 planetary spheres overlaid on the Pythagorean cube 7, we see the stars and signs of the zodiac at the top, Saturn through Mercury, down the back of the chair, the moon in the sky, and the earth in his hands. The logic of this order doesn't appear to make sense until you look at an image which shows the spheres mapped onto the 7 points, the hexagram. Note how the sun, symbolized by the circled dot, in other words known as the circumpunct, and that's a subject for a whole other presentation on its own, is at the center of the diagram, and how the planets are divided with the outer ones being above the sun. In Revelation, we find that we read, "I saw 7 golden candlesticks, and in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man," which is the sun of our solar system, the Son of Man. "And in his right hand 7 stars," in other words, the 7 wandering stars. "And his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength." And we find this mirrored in the religion of Judah of the menorah. The 7 candlesticks used for the Hebrew Festival of Lights appears to represent the 7 ancient planetary wandering stars, or the planetary spheres, as do the 7 stars in Revelation. Hence the 7 days of creation and the 7 days of the week related as well, corresponding to the 7 chakra or energy centers of the body, corresponding to the 7 candles at the throne of God. which was equated in occult philosophy as the sun, great central sun. And this referred to a spiritual sun. It was likened to the sun behind the sun. And in metaphysical spirituality, occult mystery teachings, essentially Egyptian mystery schools, this was equated with Sirius, the star Sirius, which has been believed to be in a binary system with our sun, with our solar system. And so hence Sirius, which was equated with both Isis and mainly with Isis, but also equated to Osiris for the reason that Sirius was located was the brightest star of the constellation Canis Major, or the greater dog, which was the dog constellation that follows Orion in the sky. So in other words, it's the little dog that follows the Fool on the Fool tarot card. This is also Toto, who follows Dorothy around. This is Anubis, the servant to Osiris. So in other words, Sirius was again the consort of Osiris. So that's how Sirius was related to Osiris. But again, so Sirius was believed to this day and for good reason, very likely, to be in a binary system with our solar system. And so again, Sirius is essentially considered the mother of our sun, which in electric universe cosmology is believed to actually be powered. Our sun is believed to be powered directly from Sirius, connected through electric Birkeland currents, or in other words, massive electric cosmic filaments, which are the webs that we see when viewed from with an infrared radiation telescope, or in other words, from the James Webb Deep Space Telescope, and other images of the entire universal structure, where we see it's just like a neural network of neurons in the brain. These are Birkeland currents. These are electric filaments along which every star system is born and every solar system and galaxy exists. They're powered by these giant cosmic filaments. So this is the basis for the theory that our sun is powered directly by Sirius. In other words, the mother of our sun Helios.
The seventh central hub is the 0 point, the point of initiation, the ignition point, which corresponds to the pineal gland, exactly at the corner, or the central point between all the axes of the brain, of the cubic field of the brain. At the central point, in the very center of it all, is where is the ignition point, which is the cube is straight lines, straight edge, which are phallic lines, and the spherical toroids are feminine curves, feminine arcs or arches. So you have the feminine eternal circle and the structural confines of the masculine cube, which create essentially the human skull. It's a cubed sphere, where it's a spherical cube, essentially. It's not quite perfectly spherical and it's not quite perfectly cubical, but it's a perfect blend, a perfect combination of both masculine and feminine. And so as I was showing, within the central structure of the human six axes, the human axes of the sacred geometry of the brain, at the very center point, we find the pineal gland buried deep within the center structure of the third ventricle. Again, the third ventricle, if you go back and see Symbols of Power Part 2 and Part 3 for the full explanation, but we will be covering this much more fully in future films, is the third ventricle is essentially, it's also known as the Cave of Brahma. So this is the cave. It is the cave at the top of the mountain. It is remember we were talking in the last films about the fornix. The fornix is the vaulted archway, the roof which covers the third ventricle. It is the vaulted archway within the sacred temple, within the temple of God. And so it is that cave at the top of the mountain. It is that hollow void at the top of the mountain where you climb the steps, you climb the ladder to heaven, and you enter and you sit in the sacred cave, where you must offer where you must become a sacrifice, where sacrifice is demanded, and you must offer your sacrifice. You sacrifice yourself. You sacrifice the ego, and you have to die to oneself in order to be reborn to a higher consciousness, to a higher understanding, to a higher nature, to a higher wisdom, to a higher power. So you must enter the cave and sacrifice yourself to become reborn and to become resurrected, to become Christed, to become anointed at the Most High, at the pinnacle of the apex of enlightenment.
And to fully understand the entire meaning and context and the countless examples of the symbolism and the stories that we find this same profound theme in See My Full Symbols of Power Part 5, Initiates of Sacred Sacrifice, The Secrets of the 101. And there's so much more to go into with all of that, so that's a mind-blowing full film on its own. It's not on my new channel, but it's on my old channel that was deleted, so I've got the archives.
And thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video and sticking with me through the end. I really appreciate it. Like I said, this video ended up being a lot longer than I had originally intended, and I originally intended it to just be something pretty humorous. But I decided to go ahead and, really drop in, really dig deep, and pull out the best of some of the knowledge that I've been sitting on for a little while, and some of the really profound original discoveries that I've just made in the process of making this video. So I decided to, really dig deep and stick it out and really provide you guys with something truly incredible, truly monumental, that will hopefully be life-changing and that will hopefully contribute to the vast body of human knowledge on this planet, despite how much time and effort and work it really goes into producing a lot of the digital graphics and the animations to be able to visually demonstrate some of the concepts that I'm talking about and some of the original discoveries that I've shown in this video here today. The best way that you guys can help support me in that work is it takes an extreme amount of time to be able to go ahead and produce a lot of those visuals for each one of these slides and each one of these scenes. If you want to help support my channel and help support this work, the best way to do that is to like, subscribe, share this content around with your friends and family on social media. Social media is really cracking down on my content lately, so it's really making it hard to continue sharing this work.
Hello everyone, my name is Cullen Smith. I'm a published author. Today I would like to introduce you all to my brand new published book, The Hive Mind Invasion of Civilization, a compendium of esoteric science, symbolism, and universal secrets. If you'd like to purchase this book, you can head over to my brand new website that I've set up. It's still very bare bones. There's a lot of work I need to do on the site, but for now it's got the basic things that I need on there until I upload all of my content. You can sign up for the newsletter to receive email updates on all of my posts as I begin to populate the site with all of my archives of articles, books, videos, and films and courses and all of that good stuff. So you'll get notifications as I begin to populate the website with all of my content on it. So that's a good reason to sign up right now, even though there's no content on it yet. But you can pick up my books there. I've got my Hive Mind book. I've also got a couple other titles to help expand and explore your own creativity and things of that nature. So these make great gifts for any friends, beloved family, any loved ones. So these are great gifts that you can pick up and also support Lifting the Veil and the work that I do in the process. So feel free and head on over to my brand new website, liftingtheveil.tv, and I will see all of you there. All right, have a great day. Thank you. My name is Cullen Smith. This is Lifting the Veil. You can find all of my full books, presentations, videos, films, articles, posts at subscribestar.com/liftingtheveil. Patreon has suspended this work and my account and income stream for this content. So if you are a supporting patron, then please, I ask you to move your support over to subscribestar.com/liftingtheveil. And I have just established a completely free, uncensored, totally free speech social media platform that replaces Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, every other platform all in one on liftingtheveil.locals.com. You can download the Locals app and you can join our group and have totally free speech and totally uncensored, unrestricted content access. And there is also a ton of exclusive content, and I will leave the cited reference links in the description down below. And, leave me your comments. I definitely want to know what you have to share and what you have to think about all of this stuff, and I will see you in the next video.